Zach Osterman from Indy Star joining us now. Zach, how are you doing, man?
How are we doing? Sorry about that.
Oh, that's all right. Plenty to talk about this weekend, especially in regards to Indiana. I was just saying you've got the football, both kinds, which are of grave importance. Indiana, the soccer team is just – this has been one of those years. This team was not a lot of – I shouldn't say expected them. It's always expected, but they weren't having the normal season that they have of one that kind of dominates. But man, they've been able to come back, win the conference title, and now put themselves in a position to win another conference championship.
Yeah, I mean, I think a little bit of that is probably always just the thing we should always remind ourselves, which is, the season. Seasons are long, no matter what sport you're talking about, and you can look at a certain moment at a certain time and say, "Oh my God, everything's terrible," and it will all still possibly turn around. You're right; it wasn't a vintage season for IU soccer at certain points, and I think there's been kind of one of those where soccer is very much one of those sports where when you want to achieve at that level, not just make the tournament or compete in your conference, but win your conference tournament, be a national seed, all those kinds of things. The reality is if your conference can't give you the quality, and the Big Ten's maybe just a little bit down, and obviously Indiana might be part of that, but you only have so many opportunities to add those wins in the non-conference. And I think Indiana missed a couple of those early in the year in terms of maybe spots where it really could have strengthened its resume. But listen, at the end of the day, I use this comparison a lot, or not this comparison, this example, I should say. Indiana's taken, if I'm not mistaken, 4 teams into the NCAA tournament, Indiana men's soccer, undefeated. Not one of those has won a national title. On the other hand, I can remember the 2012 national title, which is the last one Indiana won. Those guys crashing out at the first time of asking against Michigan State in the Big Ten tournament, and a lot of us felt like maybe that season was over. And then they go into the tournament, they beat up Xavier, and they take off. You just never know kind of what's going to get you going at any given moment.
Yeah, and I'm kind of being a little selfish because the College Cup this year in Louisville, right down the road, man, what that would be, what kind of party that would be for Hoosier fans to be able to crash that one.
Yeah, I mean, and truthfully, you don't get those events here very often. I know they played it in Cary a lot lately. There's been such a desire in recent years to keep that event in as warm of a climate as possible, and obviously there's been a lot of discussion about splitting soccer into a full season sport, playing a fall season and then a spring season, and playing your national championship game in either like late May or June. That seems to have lost steam for whatever reason, but the opportunity, if Indiana could seize it, we have no idea what their path is going to be or where they'll be seated. I know there was a feeling they may not have made the tournament if they hadn't got to at least the Big Ten tournament final. The flip side is if they win the Big Ten tournament, it does feel a little bit like you might be in a situation where they get a top 16 seed on, maybe not, I don't want to say not on merit, but maybe a little bit on reputation as well. We'll see. But, whatever their path is, if they could get to Louisville, you're right, it would be, the opportunity to be that close to your fan base is one I don't know this program's had in quite a while. I think they might have played at least one national championship game in Columbus, if I'm not mistaken. So, but I mean, it's been a while, and realistically speaking, if you're Indiana, you would love to be playing that close to home.
Absolutely. Speaking of close to home, Indiana football not traveling too far this weekend as they will be busing over to Champaign to take on the Illini in a game that is a quote-unquote must-win for Indiana if bowl eligibility still remains on the table. And a lot of people are starting to believe that it's Tom Allen's job that is also on the line with each and every game as we move forward in this last few weeks of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not really I'm not really sure if Tom Allen's job's on the line. I mean, it might be. I just don't think. I'm not sure anybody's come to that decision yet. And we've obviously, I know a lot of people have talked about. I think you and I have talked about where the buyout is, and just kind of where things are. I mean, listen, this is again just kind of a reminder that seasons are long, and you don't know exactly where they're going to go, and you've got to let them play out before you can draw sweeping conclusions. I mean, if Indiana wins this game, then there's a clear path to bowl eligibility. But both Indiana and Illinois, I think, because after this, Illinois has, I think, Iowa on the road, if I'm not mistaken, and then Northwestern at home. And Illinois is 4-5. So Illinois is probably looking at Indiana and saying, we've got to win this game because we're probably not going to win at Iowa, whatever you may think of Iowa and their offense, some of these over-unders. But it's unlikely Illinois is going to win at Iowa. And then Northwestern, is, to be honest, quietly put together a much better season than I think people realize. They're 4-5. They've got Wisconsin on the road tomorrow, but then they host Purdue in a game they should probably win. So they may well be playing for bowl eligibility themselves after everything that's happened in Northwestern in the last few months in that rivalry game against Illinois and Champaign the last week of the season. So the point is, if you're Indiana, I mean, in any number of ways, I think this is the toughest game left on Indiana's schedule. I think Illinois might be the best team Indiana's got left. I think, playing Illinois at Illinois, the reality is Purdue's already eliminated from bowl contention. Ohio State's got to play, or Michigan State's got to play Ohio State this weekend. So I think they will probably be at 7 losses by the time they get to Bloomington next weekend, no matter what happens. So this is the one team you're going to play that has maybe that sense of urgency of, if we beat them, our goals are still on the table for ourselves. And I think there's just the pressure. I mean, listen, I think I've had a lot of people bring it up to me. I think it's premature to be thinking about bowls and stuff. I think this team's got to, I would say, have that conversation. If Indiana can win on Saturday, then I think it's fair to start having that conversation, because you got 2 rivalry games left. The first one's at home. You should be favored in all likelihood, I would guess, in that scenario against Michigan State. And then suddenly you're 5-6 if you can pull that off going into the Purdue game. But I think Indiana's got to win this weekend before I would seriously sort of, I guess, entertain, the notion of Indiana as a bowl eligible team. But having said that, it's in their hands. And I thought they looked good, not great, but good against Wisconsin last weekend. I thought there were some encouraging signs, and I wouldn't put it past them to win this weekend. I'm not predicting they will necessarily, but I don't think it's impossible.
Yeah, and the fact that we're talking about this, first of all, is a conversation that a lot of people would not have thought that we would be having. The win over Wisconsin was unexpected, but from what we saw at the Penn State game, I was like, man, they played with Penn State and showed that they could possibly play with teams that they had left on their schedule. And maybe if there's always the ifs and ups and then things you can question throughout the year, how this game or that game could have gone a different way. But we are here, and they do have this opportunity. And while the road game at Illinois makes that all that more difficult, Illinois has not exactly lit the world on fire this year either. But I agree with you. It is definitely the best team left on their schedule in my mind as well. Both teams are coming off of wins, so something is going to give. And the road advantage is going to be something tough for Indiana to overcome. But again, man, what we saw at Penn State, that showed me a fight. It reminded me of last year when usually when the team, a lot of times, but the season has just gone into the dumpster, they're not able to bring that fight. But they went up to East Lansing last year and pulled off an upset that I didn't think was possible. So I don't put anything past what this team is capable of doing, especially with how they're playing right now.
No, I mean, I think that's completely fair. I don't, and let's be clear. Illinois, on the one hand, has a couple nice wins in its last 3. It went on the road and beat Maryland. It was very narrowly lost at home to Wisconsin. And then, on last Saturday, went on the road and beat Minnesota with a last-second touchdown drive, or last minute, I think, touchdown drive. So Illinois is playing a little bit better as well, to its credit. On the other hand, this is an Illinois team that only scored 7 on Nebraska. This is an Illinois team that gave up 44 to Purdue, which is, not necessarily just a rollicking, juggernaut of an offense. It's an Illinois team with flaws, but it's also an Illinois team that in isolation, I think, has some very real advantages over Indiana, particularly the offensive line versus defensive line, and where, maybe Indiana as an offense can kind of get up to when already you're struggling to move the ball and score the ball consistently. But again, this is not a pie. It would not be pie in the sky. Like you would not, it would not be the result that led, the Big Ten Network wrap-up show at the end of the day that, oh my God, did you see this? It would be, two teams of, generally sort of the same, kind of tier, somewhere between like 4 wins and 7 wins, reasonable expectation of possibly making a bowl game, but not necessarily a guarantee. Some really good players in some individual spots, some glaring weaknesses in some others. And again, both of them, I personally, I think there's a decent chance both of them are going to look back on this game, whether they win it or lose it, as the game that ultimately kind of decided whether or not they would go to a bowl. Because Indiana obviously needs to win it to go bowling, unless I do think there's sort of a scenario where some 5 and 7 teams are going to get in the bowl field this year. It's a little muddied up right now, and I haven't looked super closely at it because, to be frank, it hasn't really been relevant to Indiana until very recently. But to get to 6 wins, I don't think Illinois can do it without beating Indiana, and obviously Indiana can't do it without beating